I'm going to do a little bit of comparisons between some of the plans that was mentioned, the different plans. There's 4 secure food supply plans. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about how they're similar before I go on into the secure pork supply plan. So some of it Craig has said, but there's other plans that we're, thank you, just going to bring up. So, of course, I don't need to tell you all that the North America ag industry is unique. The size, the efficiency, the movement of animals is going to give us some real challenges as we go forward with the secure pork supply plan. As we look at ways to respond to a foreign animal disease outbreak, how we respond is going to depend a lot on the magnitude of the outbreak, the location, and the characteristics involved. Of course, any kind of movement restrictions in the pig world are going to seriously lead to overcrowding conditions, animal welfare issues, and health issues. At the Center for Food Security and Public Health, for those that aren't familiar with it, Jim Roth is the executive director. We're housed at Iowa State. Dr. Roth wrote a document on the phases of FMD response. Some of this he started writing when the center started working on the secure milk supply plan, but it can be applied to an FMD response, and this is FMD only, for the different industries or the species that it affects. There's 5 different phases in this plan. The first is the heightened alert, and that would be if Mexico or Canada is infected, but the United States is not. Phase 1 is the period of time from that we know we have our first case till the time that they decide the extent of the outbreak. So the idea in this document is it's written to be within 3 to 4 days' time. Then phase 2 is the time that it takes to figure out the extent and to start implementing what exactly is going to happen during phase 2, what measures are going to be taken to eliminate it, how are animals going to be handled, movements, and so on. There's 6 different types under phase 2, and I'll get into those in a minute. And those are all, each type is set, and what happens in that type is set depending on how big the outbreak is. And then phase 3, you're now entering the recovery phase, and phase 4 is when we're once again declared free. So back to phase 2. This is when we're responding to the outbreak. And we now know how big it is, and we now launch the appropriate response. So the way it's written, we have type 1 is just a focal small outbreak. So in a type 1, it may be that it's only 1 or 2 farms. Those farms may be stamped out. The problem may be solved with a different strategy than if we go up to a type 5, where, of course, it's a catastrophic response, and many areas in the United States are now affected. So be aware of that document. You can go onto our website. If you Google CFSPH, all these documents are on there for the different food supply projects. You can look and see the progress. So some of the common components of the different food secure plans. Now be aware, we have just heard about the secure egg supply, and that's for high path AI. There's the secure turkey, which is high path. There's also secure milk, and that just focuses on FMD. And then we thought we'd be ambitious in the pork industry, and we decided we're going to take on FMD, CSF, ASF, and swine vesicular disease. Be aware that with all these food secure plans, that there is government and industry and academia partnership. These are something that have not been developed in a vacuum. If you look at, I had some slides in that had names, and I probably had 10 slides with different names packed of individuals in these different groups that are involved in planning. Many of these programs have a pre-outbreak preparedness component. And one thing that Craig talked about is he talked about the testing, the biosecurity measures that would be implemented, and even the testing that would go on during the high path incident. But also, you're collecting samples every 6 months without an outbreak. So they have their employees, as you talked about, there's a DVD for training. They know how to collect these samples. They're collected every 6 months, taken to the diagnostic lab. They run the testing. They enter the data so that they know all this system is up and going and working so that it's ready to go when it actually happens. They do have biosecurity, surveillance, epidemiology questionnaires, and movement permits. Now, these are, we vision that the pork supply will have all these things at this point. We're not that far into the program as what the secure egg is. but we see those as being a common component for all the plans. Risk assessments, there's been some discussion on risk assessments. Some of those have been completed, some are in progress. I'll talk a little bit about where we are in deciding what risk assessments need to be performed on the pork end. The plans are based on current capabilities and will evolve. That's one thing, they're always work in progress. As things evolve over time and new capabilities develop, the plans can change. And as it was stated, these are guidelines. These are something that we hope when we have all these different people that help develop the plans, that there's a lot of buy-in beforehand, that you hope when the time comes that it's something that they're taken into account. But you have to remember that the final decisions are made by the responsible officials during the outbreak. And these all have training and outreach components pre and post outbreak too. Another thing, these plans have all been funded through the USDA. So it is something that the industry and the government are working together to develop these plans, and that's really important as we move forward. The goal of the Secure Pork Supply Plan is to develop the procedures to allow the safe movement of animals with no evidence of infection in an FAD control zone to a pork processing plant or to other sites to accommodate different stages of production. So, as it was stated, the secure egg supply is now in its 5th year of planning, I believe. Secure milk in its 4th, secure turkeys in its 3rd, and we just finished up our 1st going into our 2nd. So there's a lot of things that Craig talked about that they've been working on for several years, and this is something that we've just been working on a year. So we have a ways to go, but we're going to keep moving forward. The way this all started, we started with a planning committee last fall. On that planning committee, there's, I believe, 35 to 40 individuals, all coming from different federal, state offices, representative from different phases of the swine industry, members from Pork Board, NPPC, and ASV, and we also have several individuals that are disease experts or production experts too, all providing input. Our first meeting was held last October. Several things came out of that meeting. One of them was the formation of 7 working groups. As you can see there, they're biosecurity, surveillance, compartmentalization, which is also with monitored premises. Data management is a huge one. Risk assessments, what to do if we get the outbreak tomorrow versus realizing that this plan takes time to develop. And then, of course, communications. So this is the time during the planning committee meeting that it was decided that we would work in the plan for all 4 diseases. And now I can say that overall speaking, and it does apply to things like the biosecurity. However, when we get into some of the details, you'll see some of them we maybe need to take on one of the diseases at a time. As far as disease transmission, there are some similarities, again, as to why we could do the 4 diseases in the plan. None of them are zoonotic. Direct contact and oral exposure are the most important forms of transmission. Indirect contact does play a role. And one thing that we have to keep in mind is we're planning with these. The pigs do exhale a large amount of FMD virus, and cattle are susceptible to aerosolized virus. Now, why is that important? Well, as we're developing the pork supply plan, we do need to hear from other industries too, because our plan is going to involve movement of animals, some of them through areas where there's cattle, dairy animals and such. And so their input is also important because I anticipate down the road there's also going to be a secure beef supply at some point. And we hope that they don't start putting things in place that really restrict what we can do. So it's a matter that, especially at FMD, we all need to work together. One thing that was talked about at the planning meeting is vaccine. What's the role of vaccine going to be as we move forward with our plan? And, of course, there's vaccine for FMD and CSF. It most likely will not be immediately available and will be in short supply. We're not discounting the use of vaccine. We're just being realistic that we do need to come up with alternative strategies on how to handle this. ASF and swine vesicular disease, there's no vaccine. So we just need to come to a realization that it may not be a viable option depending on what the type and the extent of the outbreak is. So now I'm going to break down a little bit into the working groups, talk about what their charge was that came from the planning committee and what they've accomplished up to this point. My goal here today is just to give you guys an idea of what we've been working on. Look for your input. We realize we're not doing this in a vacuum. That's why we have so many people involved at this point. We welcome input at any time, so I'll be giving you my email address, and so as you're listening, that's our goal today, is so that you're aware of what we're doing and are welcome to get involved. The original charge that came out of the planning committee was to define the biosecurity performance standards prior to an outbreak. The idea would be that once the outbreak occurred, that these premises that have taken these biosecurity measures could be designated as a monitored premises in the event of an outbreak. So our approach was that I'm the chair of this working group, and we took the pork board biosecurity guidelines that they have, plus we went through 3 protocols from 3 different companies of what their biosecurity guidelines are. We combined the protocols, broke them down, divided them to level 1, level 2. Level 1 are biosecurity measures that we are recommending. So it's something that they're not audited, they're just something that is recommended for people to do. Level 2 is the next step, and that would be the ones that would be audited. They could be audited prior to the outbreak, so that if you're already considered an audited level 2, that once the outbreak occurred, that the idea you'd be moved into monitored premises status more quickly than someone who has not been audited, and that would take time. We have a working group of about a dozen people that have reviewed and edited parts to these the different plans. So where we're at now with the biosecurity protocols is we're finishing final edits on them. They're ready to go to the planning committee. We're looking for feedback from the planning committee to come back to us, edit those, and then they can go out for further review. We'll be posting them online. There'll be a draft, kind of a working draft. We talk a lot in the biosecurity performance standards about the clean, dirty line. And so we're working on some illustrations. We're trying to make these flexible enough that if we talk about measures taken to cross the clean, dirty line, that the management, the owner, the veterinarian can work together to set where that clean, dirty line might be on that site. So we're not making them so stringent that they can't be applied to different sites and different production layouts. The surveillance working group, it is chaired by Jeff Zimmerman, and their original charge was to develop recommendations. Keywords here are to use comprehensive and integrated surveillance prior to the outbreak, to have surveillance in place during the outbreak, and to help establish freedom from the disease, as well as what it takes to be eligible for compartmentalization. Again, this was the charge that was given to the group. So some things that they've had several conference calls. This is by far the largest of the working group. I think they have 30-some people that participate and provide input. The whole idea here is that Jeff's very taking into account what is going on in the industry already. He wants to make sure that it's not something that's going to be a financial burden to the industry. He wants it to be able that, and not just he, this is the input from the call, is to do it so that producers can collect the samples, much like the egg industry is doing, that they can submit them. And we've been talking about what the incentive might be to do that. Another important component would be just like we talked about with the egg group, if they're collecting the samples every 6 months, so you have employees that know how to collect the samples, know how to, they drive them to the lab, they know how to run the tests at the lab, they've got the reagents there, they know how to enter the information into the website, that everybody's got it all going, and that's kind of what we want to do, is to make sure that everything is up and running so that you're not trying to, everybody learn how to do all this the day of an outbreak, and things just don't flow. So what's going on with the surveillance right now is they're working on drafting a straw man protocol that then will go back to the surveillance working group to be discussed and edited. The third working group is the Compartmentalization and Monitored Premises Working Group. This is chaired by Jim Roth. The charge was to receive and maintain monitored premises status during an outbreak, and also for systems, what it would take for systems to be eligible for compartmentalization according to the OIE guidelines. From what we understand, currently there is no country that has taken the steps. We hear that possibly Brazil and Chile are trying to take the steps to form a compartment on the swine end. There are regular guidelines in the OIE documents for this. So it's something that we want to give it a try and see if it can be done. Of course, with the monitored premises, biosecurity and surveillance are important components of that. So right now that part's on hold for this group. They're waiting to see what comes from the biosecurity and surveillance groups. But back to the compartmentalization. The group has talked quite a bit about this. Decided, of course, with the OIE, you have to have a compartment that's disease specific. It has to, the measures and surveillance and everything that you write up and submit has to be around one disease. So they decided that we'd start with a swine specific disease. Classical swine fever is the first one that we're going to try to tackle. So we've approached, we have one production company that has agreed to be the guinea pig for us. So the idea is that we're going to work through with them, providing the documents that we feel are outlined in the OIE guidelines to the chief veterinary officer, whoever he designates for us to work with, see what we're missing, see what more detail is needed, all that information. It's going to be a back and forth process to see what the roadblocks are that we're not, we've had discussions trying to decide what they are, and until we actually work through the process, we thought that would be the best way to identify what other things that we need to come up with and the information we need to gather. So that's where we are right now, is we're starting to work with that company to work through the application process to be a compartment. Data management working group. This one is chaired by Fred Bourgeois with the USDA. Their original charge is to enable the optimal management of data during an FAD outbreak. And again, key words: data collected prior to, entry and management of, and the sharing of the information. And that's one thing that Craig talked about on the secure egg supply, is that especially through that they are entering a certain amount of data, they're entering mortality data. So what kind of data on the pork industry do we need to have accessible so that incident command can look at it and say, they're doing this, they're doing that, they're doing this, okay, they're allowed to move animals. So what kind of data needs to be recorded at the producer level, at the diagnostic lab level? How does it need to be entered and managed? How can it be shared? Who's willing to share what? So there's a lot of issues that need to be worked through with that working group. So we've discussed what's going on with the other secure food supply plan. We've discussed what types of gaps exist. We realize we may not know all the gaps that exist, so we decided to do a couple questionnaires. We've sent surveys to state veterinarians and a group of state veterinarians and non-laboratories, hoping that some of the information we get back for like the non-labs, it may be what kind of information they get from producers and veterinarians. So it may not necessarily be what information they gather at that site, but what information they get. So that, do they have that information accessible and tagged with the diagnostic samples, or how do we need to address some of these gaps? On the producer end, which of course the producers play a very important role in this, Patrick Webb has been working on a document, the steps for producer participation, and it goes on. It was not meant for you to be able to read this, but the Pork Board's Swine Health Committee and PPC's equivalent committees, I don't know if it's Swine Health, all producers on those groups have seen this, provided input. It has 3 different areas. It has pre-harvest traceability, it has biosecurity, and it has surveillance. So you're welcome to ask Patrick questions when I'm finished. He can sure come up here and answer any questions you have about that document. Risk assessments. We have a working group on risk assessments. This is chaired by Tim Goldsmith with the Center for Animal Health and Food Safety here at Minnesota. We talked about risk assessments play an important role. The charge that they were given is to recommend and prioritize risk assessments necessary to provide additional basis for the plan. So during our calls, of course, risk assessments need to be disease and commodity or movement specific. So that working group has prioritized the diseases that we're working on. They determined that FMD's first, CSF, then ASF, and swine vesicular disease. We've also had talks about the type of movement priority. Is wean to finish or nursery to finish a priority, genetic replacements into the breeding farm. So we've had those discussions. What we've decided at this point is that we'll continue with the calls as we need to, that as funding becomes available, that we can set more priorities and have detailed discussions as to what exactly we want in some of the risk assessments. Of course, the outbreak tomorrow, what happens if we get it before we're all through the next several years in the planning process? So they were charged with recommending policies and procedures for maximizing the plan while minimizing spread if it occurs tomorrow. And right now what we're doing with this is the Pork Board has a document called the Highly Contagious Foreign Animal Diseases of Swine Strategy document, and it's a basic overview. Our group has been working, that was written in 2006, I believe. Our group is working on updating that. It's something that could be used if we had a FAD outbreak tomorrow. Another document that's being written, Jim Roth is writing this one, and it's a document on the factors to consider in a stop movement order. So not only does it include an idea of how you could actually stop movement, but actually how to restart it again. And I know that there's a lot of different opinions on if movement would need to be stopped or how long it would need to be stopped. And so that's what the need for this document arose from some of the different opinions out there. So the next steps are to finish those documents and send them back to their working group for review. And then, of course, communications. The interesting thing about communications is there's already a cross-species FMD communications team. And Cindy Cunningham and Teresa Roof, both with the National Pork Board, are on that team. And so they've shared with me that the goals of that team have been to protect animal health and minimize disease spread, to ensure consumer confidence, of course, which is very important, and to prevent supply disruption. Several of the desired outcomes of this team is to serve as the umbrella for the outreach. So now each species may have their message and their mechanism on how to get it to their individuals, but they also want to be able to have it all come back together and speak with one voice, especially when it comes to the consumer. They don't want to duplicate efforts. They want to make sure that people understand that it's not a food safety issue. And so they have actually a website, and they kind of want it to be the go-to website. It's footandmouthdiseaseinfo.org, and so they have several different documents for all the species on that website. And of course, then we have the other 3 diseases, and their group is working on starting some messaging for CSF, ASF, and swine vesicular disease. So I went through some of the goals, the charge, and the approach. Talked a little bit about where we are. Again, we've just been in the first year. We have a lot of people working on it, always looking for input.